At 18, I was already supporting myself completely. My younger brother Carson sneered and called me pitiful because I was still working weekends. Our parents only sighed and said, "Just be happy for him, he has potential." 8 years later, I pulled my BMW to a stop in front of a downtown coffee shop in Raleigh. A guy in dirty clothes, hair unkempt, tapped on my window asking for spare change. I looked closer. It was him, Carson. His eyes widened when he recognized me. I lowered the window just enough, smiled, and said, "The potential. Still waiting." My name is Destiny Brooks, and if you saw me now, sharp suit keys to a leased BMW in my hand, running my own event planning company here in Raleigh, you'd probably think everything was handed to me on a silver plate. Nothing could be further from the truth. While some kids grow up with parents who cheer every small win, mine spent years making sure I knew I was the spare, the one who had to scrape by while Carson was the star they invested everything in. I was 16 when I started picking up weekend shifts, waitressing at a local diner and folding clothes at the mall, just to save for community college. Carson never had to lift a finger. Mom and Dad Lois and Philip always had an excuse. He's focusing on his future, he has real potential. I got eye rolls and comments about how sad it was that I still had to work. Those little cuts added up fast. But I kept going quietly, building something they never saw coming. And one day they would notice, just not in the way they expected. If you want to hear how I turned all of that around and finally closed the door on them for good, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a like, so this story reaches more people. Let's get into it. Those weekend shifts started when I was 16. I took a waitress job at a busy diner off Glenwood Avenue, serving coffee refills and breakfast platters to the morning crowd, then headed straight to Crabtree Valley Mall for the evening shift, folding clothes and helping customers in the fitting rooms. The money wasn't great, but every dollar went into a savings account for college because I already knew no one else would cover it for me. At home, things looked completely different for my younger brother Carson Brooks, who was 3 years younger and never had to worry about earning a cent. He spent his days gaming in the basement or hanging out with friends, blasting music through the new headphones Mom and Dad bought him without question. Carson didn't even look for part-time work. Whenever I brought it up, he'd just shrug and say, "School was enough stress." My mom, Lois Brooks, and my dad, Philip Brooks, always found ways to justify it. They'd tell me Carson needed space to grow into his talents, that pushing him into a job too early might distract him from bigger things. Meanwhile, my Aunt Regina Brooks, Mom's younger sister, who lived just a few miles away and dropped by several times a week, joined right in. She'd sit at the kitchen table with Mom, sipping coffee, and talk about how Carson had so much potential, how he was destined for something special. I'd come home, exhausted, uniforms smelling like grease and laundry detergent, feet aching from standing all day. The first time I walked in after a double shift, Mom glanced up from her phone, looked me over, and said it was a shame I had to work so hard at my age. Dad chuckled and added that at least it taught responsibility, but then turned the conversation back to Carson's latest school project that apparently showed real creativity. Carson loved those moments. He'd lean back in his chair, smirking, and throw in comments like how most kids my age were out having fun, not slinging hash browns or organizing shelves. One Saturday evening, I dragged myself through the door around 9, starving after skipping dinner to cover for a coworker. Carson was at the table with my parents and Aunt Regina, laughing about some video he'd shown them. When he saw me, he grinned and said, "Look who's back, the weekend warrior. Still pitiful that you have to clock in while the rest of us relax." They all laughed, Aunt Regina the loudest, patting Carson's arm like he'd just told the cleverest joke. Mom gave me a quick, "Hey, sweetie," before asking Carson to tell the story again. I stood there, a second, shoes still on, grease stains on my shirt, feeling completely out of place in my own house. Grabbing a glass of water, I mentioned I'd stayed late because someone needed the shift covered. Carson snorted and replied that normal teens partied or dated, not hauled boxes of inventory for minimum wage. I told him I was saving for a car so I wouldn't need rides from Mom and Dad forever. That should have made sense, but Mom just pressed her lips together and sighed. Destiny don't start. Carson's on a different path. You should be happy for him. My face heated up as I asked what exactly I was supposed to be happy about him doing nothing while I worked every free hour and still got mocked. Carson leaned back further, arms crossed, and said, "Maybe if I stopped obsessing over pennies, I'd enjoy life a little more." Something tightened inside me then, not exploding all at once, but cracking just enough to feel permanent. I didn't yell or storm out. I just looked at him. Really looked at the smug expression, the new hoodie he hadn't paid for, and made a quiet decision. Fine, he could be the one with potential. I'd keep grinding. One day we'd see whose path actually led somewhere. That night, lying awake, I replayed every laugh and dismissive glance. It didn't make me cry or rage, it just fueled me. Over the next months, those shifts became my routine, the money piling up slowly while Carson coasted, backed by excuses from Mom, Dad, and Aunt Regina. They kept praising his future, and I kept working quietly, steadily, waiting for the long game to play out. Senior year rolled around fast. By then, Carson had his acceptance letter from NC State University, a big in-state school with a strong reputation that fit perfectly into the plans my parents had for him. They took out parent loans to cover the difference after scholarships, excited about investing in what they called his bright future, and talked openly about how it was worth every penny. The celebration started weeks before he even moved in. Mom turned it into a full event at our house one weekend evening, inviting relatives and a few family friends over for dinner. Balloons hung from the chairs, and a sheet cake on the counter read, "Congrats, Carson," in red icing. Aunt Regina arrived early, carrying a wrapped box with a new laptop inside, something Carson had mentioned wanting for his classes, along with an envelope holding $800 she'd saved up as a special gift. When everyone gathered in the living room, Dad raised a glass and spoke about how proud they were, how Carson was heading off to build something real. Mom handed him the main envelope from them, beaming as he opened it, and saw the check for the bulk of the total $5,000 they'd put together for startup expenses, books, and whatever else he needed. Carson whistled low, thanking them with a big grin, while Aunt Regina clapped and said this was just the beginning of great things for him. I came home from a late shift that same day, walking into the noise and laughter, carrying a backpack heavy with community college application printouts. Mom spotted me at the door and waved me over quickly, saying I was just in time for Carson's surprise toast. No one had mentioned the party to me beforehand, and as cousins asked about my plans, I answered quietly that I'd enrolled at Wake Tech Community College starting that fall. The response was polite, but flat, like I'd said something ordinary before. Talk shifted right back to Carson crushing it at state. Later, while clearing plates in the kitchen to stay busy, I overheard Mom on the phone in the den with a relative who couldn't make it. She explained how they'd offered to help me the same way if I chose a 4-year school like Carson, but since I insisted on handling community college alone, they respected my independence. My stomach dropped. Hearing that for the first time, they'd never actually said those words to my face. I stood frozen by the sink water running over a glass, realizing the support was always there for the path they approved, just not for mine. The next morning, with the house still scattered with leftover cups and wrapping paper, I found one of the receipts on the counter from the laptop purchase and the bank slip tucked nearby. Seeing the numbers laid out, thousands committed without hesitation, made the difference undeniable. They'd stretched their budget for Carson's dorm setup, tech gear, and cash buffer, while my acceptance packet from Wake Tech sat unopened on my desk, tuition and books fully on me from savings earned shift by shift. Carson left for orientation a few days later, the driveway loaded with new bedding, a mini fridge, and boxes of supplies my parents helped pack. Mom hugged him long at the car, eyes misty, telling him to call anytime he needed anything. Dad shook his hand firmly and slipped another small envelope into his pocket for gas or food on the drive. As they waved him off, the house felt oddly quiet, but the excitement about his new chapter lingered in every conversation they had that week. I kept my own plans private after that, filling out financial aid forms alone at night and mapping bus routes to campus. Wake Tech was practical, affordable, and close enough to keep working, but celebrating it felt pointless when no one asked. The contrast hit harder with each passing day. Carson, starting at a major university, fully backed me piecing together community college on my own terms without a single family toast or envelope. Those details stacked up quiet but sharp, confirming where the real investment always went. That fall, I moved into a small apartment near Wake Tech. It was a cramped one-bedroom above a strip mall, cheap enough that I could cover rent with the 2 jobs I lined up right away, one early mornings at a coffee shop near campus, the other evenings restocking at a grocery store a bus ride away. Between classes, work, and studying, my days blurred into a tight routine, with little room for anything else. I kept expenses as low as possible, buying generic brands at the store where I worked for the employee discount, and cooking simple meals like pasta or rice that stretched for days. Sleep came in short stretches, often at the desk with books open or on the bus ride home. The course load was heavy from the start, 18 credits plus labs, so I spent most free hours in the library pushing for the highest grades I could manage to open better doors later. News about Carson filtered back through occasional family calls I overheard when visiting home on rare weekends. He'd struggled with a couple classes his first semester, barely passing after late-night cramming sessions he blamed on tough professors. Still, he partied regularly, posting photos online from fraternity events and road trips with new friends. The $5,000 ran out faster than expected on meals out, clothes, and concert tickets, leading to his first credit card charges that quickly added up. When the statement arrived with a balance he couldn't cover, he called Mom in a panic one evening. She reassured him it was normal for freshmen to adjust and promised to transfer money the next day to avoid late fees. Dad backed her up. During dinner conversations, I caught pieces of saying they'd rather help now than let small debts spiral. Extra funds showed up in his account a few times that year, whenever he mentioned running low gas for weekend drives, a new phone, after losing his, or books he claimed were required but bought used versions late. I saw the pattern clearly but stayed focused on my own grind. The coffee shop shifts taught me to handle rush hours, calmly multitasking orders while chatting with regulars who became familiar faces. At the grocery store, nights involved heavy lifting and cleaning aisles after closing, leaving me sore but with steady paychecks deposited directly. Every spare dollar went toward tuition payments or a small emergency fund, nothing wasted on extras. Toward the end of my second semester, a professor noticed my organizational skills on a group project and recommended me for an unpaid internship at a local event planning firm downtown Raleigh. They specialized in corporate gatherings and small weddings, handling everything from venue setups to vendor coordination. I started part-time, squeezing hours in on weekends when I could swap shifts, showing up early to observe and jumping in wherever needed, setting up decor, confirming timelines with clients, or troubleshooting last-minute issues. The work felt different from serving or stocking. It involved creativity mixed with logistics, turning ideas into smooth experiences people remembered. I learned quickly, taking notes on vendor contracts, budget tracking, and how to read client needs without them spelling everything out. The team was small but busy, and my willingness to stay late or handle unglamorous tasks earned quiet nods from the manager. Those months gave me real skills. No classroom covered negotiating with suppliers, managing tight deadlines, and seeing how details made or broke an event. Carson's updates continued in the background, mostly complaints about workload mixed with stories of fun outings. Another failed exam led to a major switch he framed as finding his true interest, followed by requests for more spending money that my parents provided without much pushback. They viewed it as part of supporting his growth, occasional transfers, keeping things afloat while he figured things out. My own path stayed solitary, but forward moving, the internship turning into a low-paid extension the next term, as they valued the extra help. Balancing it all left no time for socializing or breaks, but each completed event or strong grade report felt like proof I was building something solid on my own. The contrast grew starker with every family mention of Carson's latest need met quickly, yet I kept pushing, focused on the long view where effort would pay off differently. About 6 years after leaving home, things had shifted in ways I never pictured back then. My grades at Wake Tech stayed strong, combined with the hands-on experience from that internship, enough to earn a transfer spot at UNC Chapel Hill, with a full scholarship package covering tuition and most fees through grants aimed at high-achieving community college students. Moving to a shared off-campus house felt like a step up, with more space to focus on advanced courses in business and communications that aligned with event planning. The program challenged me in new ways. Larger projects, networking events on campus, and professors who pushed for real-world applications. I took on freelance gigs coordinating small local gatherings, building a portfolio of successful corporate luncheons and community fundraisers that clients recommended to others. Word spread slowly in Raleigh's tight-knit scene, leading to paid opportunities that covered living costs without dipping into loans. The rhythm became manageable: classes during the day, blended with evening planning sessions and weekend executions where everything came together smoothly. Carson's situation headed the opposite direction during those same years. He dropped out quietly after his second year at NC State, citing burnout and uncertainty about his major, then moved back home for several months while figuring out next steps. The return brought familiar patterns: late nights out, new gadgets purchased on impulse, and expectations that expenses would get handled. Mom and Dad covered basics at first, but grew frustrated as the stay stretched on with little progress toward jobs or classes. Eventually, they set firmer boundaries, insisting he contribute to household costs or find his own place if he wasn't enrolled. Carson found a cheap room share with a couple old high school friends in an apartment on the edge of town, splitting rent that started low but climbed with utilities and his ongoing spending. Credit card balances grew from online orders and nights out he couldn't quite afford on the occasional part-time work he picked up. One afternoon in downtown Raleigh, I pulled my leased BMW, my first big purchase after landing a solid full-time coordinator role, to the curb outside a coffee shop for a quick client meeting. As I waited at the light, a man in worn jeans and a faded jacket approached the window, hand out for spare change. Voice muffled through the glass. Something about the posture felt familiar. When he leaned closer, I recognized Carson, hair longer and unwashed face, thinner clothes, carrying the weight of hard weeks. His expression changed from routine pitch to shock when our eyes met. He stepped back slightly, mumbling my name like he couldn't believe it. I lowered the window partway, keeping the engine running, and took in the details: unkempt beard, scuffed shoes, the tired slump that hadn't been there before. No dramatic story spilled out. He just asked quietly if I could spare anything for coffee or bus fare, saying cash had run short that week. I held his gaze for a moment, remembering all the times potential was the excuse while I built mine from nothing. Then I smiled, not cruel, just steady, and said, "The potential? Still waiting." His face fell, words catching as he processed it. I didn't wait for a reply or explanation. The light turned green. I eased forward and merged into traffic, leaving him on the sidewalk without another glance in the mirror. The encounter lingered briefly but didn't shake my focus. Driving away felt like closing a chapter I'd outgrown long ago, confirmation that paths diverged permanently based on choices made along the way. Client meetings waited, upcoming events needed final touches, and my calendar filled with bookings that paid real invoices. Carson faded into the background again, a reminder rather than a pull, while I kept moving ahead on the trajectory I'd earned step by step. 2 years after that encounter, my company was ready to launch. I'd spent those months scaling up from freelance work into a small event planning firm focused on corporate gatherings and weddings across Raleigh, renting a modest office space downtown with clean lines and room for client meetings. The business grew steadily through referrals, companies needing smooth conferences, couples wanting personalized ceremonies without stress, and hiring two part-time assistants helped handle the increasing bookings. Planning the launch party became my biggest project yet. I booked a modern venue in the warehouse district, a converted space with exposed brick and string lights that fit the professional but approachable vibe I wanted. Invitations went out to clients, vendors, local contacts, and yes, my family, including Aunt Regina. I wasn't sure they'd come, but part of me needed them to see what I'd built without any of their backing. The evening arrived with everything running on schedule, catered small plates from a partner restaurant, custom cocktails named after milestone events, and a display wall showcasing photos from past successes alongside projections for upcoming ones. Guests mingled easily, business cards exchanged, while soft music played in the background. Mom and Dad showed up first, dressed nicely but shifting awkwardly near the entrance as they took in the crowd and set up. Aunt Regina followed shortly, offering quick hugs and compliments that sounded rehearsed. Carson trailed in last, wearing a button-down that looked borrowed and avoiding direct eye contact at first. He nodded hello, sticking close to my parents while surveying the room like he didn't quite belong. They grouped together near the bar, making small talk with a few guests who asked polite questions, but I noticed the forced smiles and frequent glances my way, pride mixed with something harder to read. Perhaps discomfort at how far removed this world felt from theirs. As the night flowed, I circulated, thanking attendees and fielding questions about services. The energy stayed positive, contracts discussed casually over drinks, partnerships hinted at for future collaborations. When the moment felt right, I stepped to the small stage area with a microphone, quieting the room for a brief toast. I kept it straightforward, thanking everyone for coming and the team that made it possible. Then I spoke directly about the journey, starting from overlooked shifts and self-funded classes to creating a space for clients who valued reliability and vision. "I've learned one thing along the way," I said, pausing to scan the crowd until my eyes landed on Carson. "Potential only matters if you act on it." The words hung clear and calm. No anger behind them, just fact. Carson's face flushed red, immediately, gaze dropping to the floor as he shifted weight from one foot to the other. Mom looked away quickly, adjusting her glass while Dad cleared his throat and studied the display wall. Aunt Regina forced a tight smile but stayed silent. No one in their group responded or clapped louder than courtesy required. The rest of the room applauded warmly, moving on to conversations as if nothing heavy had passed. The rest of the evening continued smoothly, guests enjoying the setup and leaving positive feedback on their way out. My parents approached near the end for brief goodbyes, Mom saying it was impressive, and Dad adding they were glad things worked out. Aunt Regina echoed similar sentiments, hugging me stiffly before heading to the exit with Carson, who mumbled a quick congrats without meeting my eyes. Cleaning up later with the team felt satisfying, the event executed flawlessly, new leads secured, and the statement made without raising voices. Family reactions confirmed what I already knew. The gap had widened beyond easy bridging. Their discomfort didn't ruin the night, it underscored how fully I'd created this on my terms, surrounded by people who valued the results over excuses. A few months after the party, Mom called out of the blue. Her voice sounded careful on the line, starting with small talk about the weather and how busy I must be before getting to the point Carson was struggling and needed a hand. He'd been bouncing between low-paying retail shifts and delivery gigs, nothing steady, while credit card balances piled up from habits he couldn't break. Mom said he felt lost and thought working with me might give him direction. I listened without interrupting as she explained he'd seen the company website and believed his ideas could help, especially with younger clients or social media angles. She asked if I had any openings, even part-time, to get him started. Carson got on the phone briefly, sounding subdued but hopeful, saying he was ready to prove himself and learn the business side. The request didn't surprise me. Patterns like this had played out before in smaller ways. I thought it over and told them I didn't have full-time spots open, but a minor internal project needed some freelance input, mood boards, basic vendor research, simple timelines for an upcoming corporate retreat that wasn't high profile. It seemed harmless enough to test whether he'd follow through. Carson agreed quickly, thanking me repeatedly before hanging up. The first tasks went out by email with clear deadlines and examples from past work. Early submissions came back vague concepts pulled from generic online templates, without much original thought or attention to the client brief. Follow-ups arrived late, excuses attached about unexpected shifts at his current job or technical issues. When feedback pointed out gaps like mismatched themes or unrealistic budgeting, he responded defensively, insisting his approach was creative and that clients would love the bold choices. Revising became necessary on every piece. Ideas lacked practical execution details. Vendor suggestions ignored local availability, and overall polish fell short of what even junior freelancers delivered. Attitude showed in messages, too short replies, brushing off notes, hints that guidelines were too rigid for his style. After the third round, requiring full rewrites on my end to meet standards, the pattern felt clear. Continuing would waste time and reflect poorly if anything went external. I emailed a polite close explaining the project needs shifted internally and no further input was required, thanking him for the effort. Payment for completed portions went out promptly to keep it professional. Carson's response came fast and heated texts, accusing me of setting him up to fail, claiming I never gave him a real chance because of old grudges. Then he quoted something from years back, the exact line about me being pitiful for working weekends while he relaxed. Reading it stopped me for a second, the words unchanged from that kitchen argument long ago. I typed back calmly, copying his old message word for word beneath mine. Still pitiful that you have to clock in while the rest of us relax. No extra explanation, no anger, just the mirror held up. His replies flooded in after that, defensive, then pleading, but I didn't open them. Blocking started with his number, then moms and dads when follow-up calls came asking me to reconsider or talk it out. Aunt Regina's occasional messages got the same treatment. Social accounts went private or blocked where needed. The quiet that followed felt final. No more openings for explanations or second chances I'd already extended and seen ignored. Work continued without distraction, upcoming events locking in smoothly, while new inquiries arrived from satisfied clients. The decision settled in as relief rather than regret, boundaries, long overdue, now firmly in place. Carson's situation remained his to navigate consequences of choices accumulated over years, while I focused forward on the business and life built independently. That was the last time I spoke to anyone in the family. Carson kept cycling through retail jobs and delivery apps, schedules unpredictable, and pay barely covering basics after minimum payments on cards that never seemed to shrink. Living independently meant handling rent increases and unexpected bills alone, a constant scramble that left little room for savings or stability. Mom and Dad realized too late how deep the patterns ran. Occasional attempts came through mutual contacts or old emails, messages expressing regret for past favoritism and hoping to rebuild bridges. They mentioned missing family gatherings and wishing things turned out differently, but each outreach met silence on my end. The block stayed firm, a boundary I no longer questioned. Aunt Regina stopped reaching out altogether after the first few months, her usual updates about family news drying up completely. Whatever conversations happened behind closed doors remained there, no more indirect pressure or comparisons filtering through. My own days moved forward without that weight. The company expanded gradually, taking on larger corporate contracts and destination weddings that brought in consistent revenue. Team meetings filled the office with focused energy. Clients returned for repeat events and referrals built a waiting list I once only dreamed about. Driving through Raleigh in the BMW felt routine now, a reliable part of days packed with site visits, vendor negotiations, and final walkthroughs that ended in satisfied handshakes. Looking back didn't bring anger anymore, just clarity about choices and consequences. Favoritism unchecked created expectations without accountability, leading one path to ongoing struggle, while the other demanded relentless effort that eventually paid off. The divide wasn't punishment. It was the natural outcome of years spent enabling excuses versus building resilience. For anyone watching this far, the lesson hits close. Potential means nothing without consistent action, and family ties don't excuse repeated dismissal of one person's hard work. Investing everything in one child while ignoring the other's grind often backfires in ways no one predicts. Real growth comes from owning mistakes early, not waiting until the damage shows. Thank you truly for sticking with this story. To the end, it means a lot that you took the time to listen. If any part resonated or reminded you of your own experiences, drop a comment below with your thoughts. How would you have handled the family dynamics or what stood out most? Sharing helps others feel less alone in similar situations. Hit like if it hit home, subscribe for more real life stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one.